Now, another controversial issue is privacy, right? Today we've just heard some news from Connecticut, where the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut invited Facebook executives to talk about face recognition technology. We know that Google goggles actually deliberately ruled out face recognition, even though apparently it's technically possible now.
Yes.
But since technology is available, probably in 10 years it will be almost, I guess, free, right, to implement it. Maybe Google will not do that, but maybe somebody else will. And we see already that Facebook is kind of doing that. What do you think will happen to the privacy of a person in 10 years?
I'm very concerned about face recognition broadly applied for, I think, the reasons that a lot of other people are. So everybody knows, let's talk about the technology. It turns out that in computer science, image recognition has gotten very good at face recognition to the point where it's scary. And a statistic would be that if there are 10 or 20 pictures of you out of a crowd, we can, with some probability, identify you without your knowledge or name or so forth and so on. This activity, as I have reviewed the laws in Europe, is to do a generalized database of that category is in fact not legal without a license because of these privacy concerns. And we generally support those rules. So it's not a good idea, in our view, that these kinds of services be applied without the user's permission, because it can be abused. You can imagine all sorts of ways in which it would be abused. If I took a picture of everyone here, you could automatically name everybody, and that's really a violation of people's privacy. So we care very much about people's privacy. We want people to be able to say, I want to participate or I don't want to participate. And I think ultimately that's how the laws and regulations will emerge.
No, but there are many countries, well, in all countries, it's illegal to own guns without a license, and then there are still criminals.
Have you been to the United States?
Well, they still have to have some kind of license, permission, right?
Check, there's a few states.
There are a few states where you don't. Okay, you can just walk in and buy a gun. But anyway, in Europe that you mentioned, it's illegal to own a gun in private use, for a private use, and except for some cases. And still people commit crimes using guns. And in that sense, I think the face recognition technology in 10 years will be so cheap that people who operate without a license will be able to build it up and afford it, right?
But this is an example where the internet and communities and society will ultimately have to decide how to police such activities. Internet companies have to operate under the laws of the country that they work in.
Right.
So when we're in Russia, we operate under the Russian laws. And we have to work with the government to make sure the government understands what the technology can do. We have to respect the local culture. In some cases, we've withdrawn products because we didn't agree with the law. But we have no choice. We're not our own country. And I think that the same can be true. So you could imagine a scenario where the kinds of bad technologies could be applied by criminals, but that's true of the phone too. You know, did you know that criminals use the telephone?
That's true.
And
even cars.
They actually drive cars and they use the telephone. And they shouldn't. And in fact, criminals should not be criminals. You should stop doing crimes. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. These activities are not legal. We don't support them. And we don't want to be part of it.
To what extent do you think the new technology will indeed change the government's ability to police general crime and also fight terrorism? Or to what extent the new technology will actually reinforce the terrorist networks' abilities to do what they do?
So let's ask a question here of the audience. Let's say you have a choice of having no internet or an internet that has some criminals on it. Which do you think produces a safer society? Now, on the one hand, the internet with no internet at all, the criminals couldn't use it, but of course all of us, no criminals in here of course, all of us couldn't use it either. I would argue that, although we obviously don't want bad criminal behavior, you're fundamentally better off having the internet and then using the fact that the vast majority of people are honest, law-abiding, good citizens, well, to help you as a government. So to those people who say that somehow this is evil, this is bad, we shouldn't allow this, I answer, well, why don't we ask the people who are on the internet, the vast majority of which are honest and law-abiding, if you see things that you don't like, you know, call it out, report it. That's what crowdsourcing is all about. And I would argue that the broad penetration of the internet is ultimately better for the safety of a country, because it means that it's quicker to report crimes, it's quicker to report anomalies. The government can use the fact that the internet is connected to understand what the society is doing and understand better what people are up to.
So your response is definitely that is effectively that governments will actually be able to engage civil citizens, civil society, on a larger scale to help fight crime,
and I would also,
as well as corruption. I guess, right?
Well, the most obvious one is corruption. Let's say that there's some corruption in a country. The simplest way for citizens to try to prevent that is ask the government to fully disclose transparently where all the money goes, and then citizens who have some free time can go track it down, and they can report that, you know, the toilet seats over here cost $1,000 and they cost $10 over here, and maybe they're better toilet seats, but they're probably not 100 times more expensive in terms of the value. But
as you know, the expensive toilet seats usually are installed on military planes.
In military planes. Well, in fact, in America, there was a large, I don't know in Russia, but there was a shocking problem that we were purchasing $1,000 toilet seats for our military.
Of course.
And it turns out that this was because of the way the procurement worked. It was not, in fact, corruption, but it was an example of an inefficiency, and it was called out and it was fixed. Therefore, now we buy $5 toilet seats in our military, which is perfectly fine. My point about the toilet seat example, which is obviously a foolish one, is to say that we have an opportunity to have government be more transparent, which will help keep the government honest. And the internet also makes the citizens' activities more transparent, which also helps you understand the good and the bad of the citizenry.